Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating chapter all about that sociological tug of war between our constant, restless drive for transformation and our deep rooted, almost biological need for stability. We hear all the time that change is the only constant, right? But as this chapter explores, figuring out how to balance all that rapid change with actual social order is, well, it's the whole secret sauce to keeping our communities functioning. So we're going to explore exactly how this tension plays out, especially when we look at the wildly different worlds of rural and urban societies. Look at how sociologist Anthony Giddens visually maps this out with his clock of human history metaphor. It literally proves that rapid social change is incredibly, almost unbelievably recent. Imagine for a second the entire 500,000 years of human existence compressed into a single 24-hour day. Okay? Agriculture only shows up at 11:56 p.m. Civilizations form just a minute later. And the development of modern societies, that doesn't happen until 11:59 and 30 seconds. It's wild to think about, but almost all the rapid, structural changes we experience every day today have happened in just the last 30 seconds of our existence as a species. So here's our roadmap for today's chapter explainer. 1. Defining change. 2. Drivers of change. 3. The need for order. 4. Power and contestation. And finally, Number 5, rural versus urban societies. All right, let's kick things off with section 1, defining change, and specifically the scale of transformation. So the absolutely crucial takeaway from this chapter is that, to a sociologist, social change isn't just some superficial shift or passing trend. No, it has to be intensive and extensive enough to fundamentally transform our underlying institutions. The sheer scale of the change really matters here. It has to impact a huge section of society and basically rewrite the very rules by which our institutions operate. That massive scale is the threshold an event actually has to cross to be officially categorized as social change. And, we can actually measure this structural change by its speed. On one side, we've got evolutionary change, a concept adapted right from Charles Darwin. This is the slow stuff, spanning centuries, where society gradually, slowly adapts to new circumstances. On the flip side, we have revolutionary change. This is fast, sudden, and usually involves really radical power shifts. Think the French Revolution in the 1790s or the Russian Revolution of 1917. But it can also apply to sudden, total transformations in how we physically live our lives, like the Industrial Revolution. Moving right along to section 2, drivers of change. Basically, what pushes society forward? This table does a great job of cleanly breaking down the interconnected catalysts of change. And a fantastic example highlighted in the chapter is the introduction of paper money. I mean, think about it. Before paper money, currency was literally tied to precious metals, like gold. Paper money itself isn't intrinsically valuable, but because it inspired trust, it completely restructured global banking, created the modern credit market, and totally transformed everyday economic life. It's a real game changer. We also see cultural drivers like Max Weber's famous studies showing how Protestant religious beliefs helped establish capitalism, and of course political drivers, like the massive historical shifts brought about by warfare and conquest. Okay, let's pivot to section 3, the need for order, the anchor of stability. I want you to think about this terrifying little thought experiment for a second. We so often think of sameness as boring and change as exciting, but imagine if you came home to completely different parents every single day. Or what if the rules of football changed every single time you stepped onto the pitch? Never ate the same meal twice. While change can absolutely be thrilling, a life without any predictable rules, continuity, or just a basic baseline of stability would be utterly exhausting and psychologically completely disorienting. And this right here is exactly why we have social order. Social order provides that essential backdrop of stability. It ensures that individuals and institutions behave predictably, follow the same rules, and that similar actions actually yield similar results. Honestly, the whole concept of change only really makes sense because we have this solid baseline of things staying the same to compare it against. Kind of like how letters pop out on a page only because of the blank white background behind them, right? Change only exists because order is there to contrast it. Let's jump into section 4, power and contestation. How do we actually maintain this balance? Well, society remains stable largely through a mix of these mechanisms. Now, while raw power and domination definitely exist, modern societies primarily rely on legitimate authority and codified law to keep things running smoothly. People generally follow the rules simply because they believe the authority enforcing those rules is legitimate and proper.
And it's this specific, delicate mix of lawful authority alongside unspoken power dynamics that truly determines a social system's real nature.
But of course, humans aren't perfectly obedient robots, right? The mere existence of power and law doesn't guarantee that everyone is just going to blindly conform. Because of this, legitimate authority is constantly met with what sociologists call contestation. Basically, that's just a broad, fancy term for insistent disagreement against the established norms, laws, or the way things are currently being done.
And this contestation exists on a really fascinating spectrum. It can be highly informal, like a youth counterculture totally rejecting mainstream clothing and hairstyles, or it can be highly structured, formal things like democratic elections, which, if you think about it, are essentially formalized systems of political competition designed to challenge the current ruling power. There are defined boundaries for dissent, and obviously crossing them usually invites a reaction from law enforcement, but contestation itself is absolutely a vital, necessary part of the social fabric. Finally, Section 5, Rural versus Urban Societies. Let's look at these environments of tension.
Just take a look at the stark visual contrast here. On one side, we have women working in a traditional cotton field, right next to a chaotic, densely packed urban street undergoing heavy construction. It is a perfect physical representation of the traditional, agriculture-based rural life literally colliding with the dense, rapidly shifting modernity of the city. As you'd expect, the forces of change and order act very, very differently in these two distinct spaces. Rural society is often deeply bound by traditional customs and natural agricultural rhythms. It's a tight-knit environment that, sociologically speaking anyway, can sometimes actually discourage individuality, simply because everyone knows everyone else. Urban society, however, is the exact opposite. City life and modernity go hand in hand. The city offers incredible anonymity, it provides vast amenities and institutions that only massive, dense populations can support. And all of that actively nurtures the modern individual and offers pretty much boundless possibilities for personal fulfillment. But as you might guess, this urban modernity brings massive logistical and social challenges to actually maintaining order. We see severe housing shortages leading directly to homelessness. We see massively overburdened mass transit systems. And we see deep, deep class and ethnic divisions. A perfect example of this last point is the rise of isolated, gated communities. These are affluent neighborhoods completely sealed off from their surroundings by high walls and controlled gates, operating almost as totally parallel societies, right smack in the middle of all the urban chaos. So I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. As Anthony Giddens' clock of human history continues to tick faster and faster in these final few seconds, take a look around your own neighborhood. Because whether you live in a quiet rural village or a bustling, chaotic urban center, you are watching the forces of relentless progress and the fundamental human need for stability battle it out in real time. How well your community manages that friction, well, that's what's going to define its future.